what do these technologies mean for communities of color? How might we gain access and how might we gain greater benefits for communities of color? So we will take questions from the audience, but first we may want to pose a couple of questions to get the discussion started. I see we have a very eager participant.
Yes, right over here. Been waiting on this moment. First of all, I think that this has just been an absolute top of the hill session this morning. Very, very informative, very much needed. Way behind on information for some of us. So each of you has done an outstanding job. But the question that I have is wrapped around the questions Jack has already identified on our document. Has each of you in your respective roles with either your companies or in representation of the form of energy alternatives that you've been working with, have you actually looked at the impact that it has on communities of color? Have you actually looked at the health risks that it is causing? Have you actually made an attempt to inform people in communities about the pros and cons as you extol the virtues of your particular alternative? Have you really, really given it a thorough vetting and given us, the public, an opportunity to know that?
So if each of you who represent companies who provide utility, energy utilities, if maybe you can clarify what your process is for choosing sites, also how those host communities are informed about the benefits as well as the risks associated with the site location. If we can start here.
Well, in terms of natural gas, we definitely feel like it is a great alternative to gasoline. And the biggest part of it is the emission side of it. The emissions basically for a natural gas vehicle is 25%, 25 to 30% less than gasoline vehicles that are on the road. In comparison, if you'll take one of the heavy-duty vehicles that I think that he referenced that will ride through communities, that vehicle was operated by natural gas. It would be the equivalent of taking 325 regular vehicles off the road. And that's why we feel like our product is a good alternative to gasoline. One, it's cheaper. The cost and infrastructure of getting it in place is higher. But one of the things that we're trying to do is work with different school systems, because obviously you got a lot of buses there that are running off of diesel, and you're right there with the kids. And so we're looking at some partnerships with some school systems to see if we can get natural gas placed in those vehicles because the effect that it will have on the emissions that comes from those diesel vehicles.
So there are no downsides and health risks? I mean, those questions I want to wrap all of it, because for everything is wonderful and the top of the line, what's wrong with it?
Well, and in terms of just the alternative of natural gas, it's much better utilizing natural gas in those type of vehicles than it is on gasoline. Now, when you get into the production of natural gas, the drilling, those type of things, I really can't speak to that in terms of our energy and resources side, which I showed you that was kind of more in the western part of Alabama, Oak Grove, the Brookwood area, and then our facilities out in Texas. So I really can't speak to that. So.
We have one of our participants who would like to.
So I think, and tell me.
Terry.
Terry is right to a certain extent, for sure. If you took all of the fossil fuels like oil, coal, natural gas, right? Meaning they're derived from fossils out of the earth. Natural gas is by far the cleanest burning of them all. There's no question about that. It's scientifically proven. Lots of studies to document it. That is true. The downside these days, and especially within the last decade, is that the natural gas, the huge reservoirs of natural gas that are being found are in these what are called Marcellus shale. They're like rock formations that are deep underneath the earth. And the process for extracting the gas has become very different than in past years, where they are now really doing what's called hydrofracking. Write this down. This is one of the things you hear from me you need to write down. Hydrofracking. Essentially what they're doing is, the fracking is they're breaking into the rock. They're breaking into that rock formation, that shale formation. And they're essentially injecting chemicals into the rock formation and heat into the rock formation to express the gas. Okay? So just think about your kettle boiling. When you put fire under the kettle, right, the water inside boils and gas in the form of air gets out, right? So they're doing that with a chemical process, fracking the rocks. The other thing about that is that those chemicals can get into our groundwater.
That's what I want.
Those chemicals, the waste that comes out of that process is now we don't really have good regulations for how to govern the waste that comes out of that process. Some of it can contain radioactive material, right? Some of it can contain very toxic substances. And the disposal of that is happening in ways that is sometimes putting it right back into surface water systems that sometimes even coincide with our drinking water system.
But that's the part that our communities ought to know. So I think somebody, a company or somebody, owes us an explanation that you just gave.
And the last thing that I'll say about the fracking process is that each fracked well uses about 5 million gallons of water. So they are taking another natural resource to sort of express this. Now, I say all of that, and I want everybody to hear me take note of this. This process has been going on for the last decade intensively. It's creating jobs. It's become an enormous new source of natural gas. And there's incredible pressure, especially in a time like this, to produce jobs. And so legislators are not paying a lot of attention to this. They're saying, well, this is great. It's natural gas. It's clean. And it's the best of all of the three. And we've got lots of sources for it. It'll last us for a long time. It will help us out of this energy crisis. But, again, I go back to questions that we need to be asking. And it's not just about informing us. How about us as the American people actually having some more decision-making power in this process? About these choices that we're making and about what needs to happen. Maybe it's just that the fracking process needs very rigorous inspection and controls. And maybe we need to do some more of that. But without the conversation, we're not getting there.
Thank you, Susan. Before we go on to the next, I would like to interject a question about the natural gas. What measures are in place currently to encourage the transition from fossil fuel to natural gas? For example, some of the fleets that you mentioned, what is being done to encourage that transition?
Well, a lot of it is, getting infrastructure put in place for natural gas vehicles. It's an expensive process, so a lot of it is assisted by state and federal funding to get the infrastructure in place. That's really the primary thing. A lot of times you'll see that when gasoline prices are high, then there's a big push toward CNG or compressed natural gas. When they go back down, then that push is not as heavy. What we want to try to do is stay with it and try to get compressed natural gas vehicles out there even more. But what you'll find is back in the early 1990s, there was a big push. Gasoline prices went up a little bit, and then next thing you know, it's backed off. So we feel like natural gas is definitely a great solution for that market, and we want to continue to push it.
Thank you. So were I a small business truck owner, I own maybe a small fleet of trucks, and I'd like to have my fleet transition, are there resources available for a small business owner to tap into to facilitate that?
In terms of your vehicles, there have been some federal tax credits because it is a higher cost to actually have CNG vehicles. Even that Honda Civic that I showed on there, it costs about $5,000 more than a conventional vehicle. So there are some costs there, but there are some tax incentives to kind of help companies offset those costs. And like I mentioned, the rate that you get for natural gas at the Max station at $1.37 right now, really the savings that you have on down the line is great as well, and then also the environmental impact that you have is significant as well.
Thank you. And Steve, excuse me, if you don't mind elaborating on what your process is for educating the community about your choice of location and what the impact is.
Our sites are largely rural. They're intentionally located sort of away from population. That's not the case universally in the U.S. In the Northeast, where the population density is much greater, it's more difficult. I'm sure, I don't know their processes for permitting there, but I'm sure they have a much more difficult prospect of siting their plants away from communities. In the Southeast, we have lots of land, and so that allows us to site these facilities out of urban areas. But even though it's in a rural sort of agricultural location, each site has to go through a permitting process, public comment again, usually multiple stages of public comment, where the community is engaged. I specifically know of a situation where we were testing carbon sequestration, which is drilling a deep well, injecting CO2 in a very deep well. This was in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and much of that process was going door to door to the community saying, this is what we're about to do, this is what we're going to try, this is what it means to you, this is what it means to the community. So a great effort. Much of that was with the environmental organizations as well, where we attempted to try to make sure everybody was satisfied with the safety and security and the process we were choosing. I guess that gets at your question. We're regulated by a process by which we have to seek public comment, public engagement for all of our sites, whether it be a hydro dam, a solar. If I was building a solar test facility, if I was putting wind turbines up on our state park ridges or wherever I was going to be putting them, I'd have to get all sorts of public comment and public engagement.
Thank you. Also, did you clarify the notification process? I'm not sure that I heard that.
Did I?
The notification process for the communities, the host communities.
Clarification. Let's see. It's required. I mean, the regulatory structure by which we operate under requires that we notify the community and requires that they participate by comment in the siting of those facilities.
We are running out of time. We have a question in the back. Mind you, we do have 2 additional Q&A sessions.
This was an excellent workshop. Let me talk about how wonderfully it was. It is really excellent. It is something, as I made a note, is that from the convention we have to make sure that we do a resolution in order to include what we need to get from here. So hats off to Jackie and Mrs. Simon and all of you that did this. I want to sort of ask a question relative to what he's saying, having been an elected official for a couple of decades and knowing what the notification process is like and how, et cetera, and also understanding from living in a rural area myself, how jobs are at a premium and how anytime something is going to bring jobs to the community, even those of us that would have a real, have some social consciousness, really don't often want to talk about, okay, this thing that I'm not so sure of, when it's going to bring a number of jobs to the community. So my thing is, how do we, and I know what you're talking about, public hearings, and we all know, unless somebody put a bug in the community, 5 or 6 folks show up. That's normally what happens. So I'm wondering, because we all have to be really good stewards of our environment, whereas we want the best, but I'm just wondering, is there another way we could, I mean, is there some kind of way that we can involve, community organizations to make sure that, the word gets out? I know we put it on, you know, we put it, we posted, we put it in the newspaper, etc. But you guys know, that really doesn't get anybody to the public hearing. We, you know, normally we got 5, 6 more. So what I'm trying to see, because guys, this is the only earth we get. And I really get concerned when, you know, when I hear about, I say, oh, I've always thought natural gas was one thing in the world, and et cetera. But when he talk about the fracking and all that, that scares me to death. So I'm wondering, is there another method can you suggest? Because I think we need to push legislators from state to the national to make sure that there are processes in place that we don't overlook the dangers and the regulation trying to get the job to the area, because all of us know we need jobs.
I would say that it's an incredibly challenging position for legislators to be in. It's jobs on the one hand, health on the other, right? And so that balance often doesn't sort of balance right. It often tips in the favor of let's just get the jobs and then we'll figure out the rest later. In terms of better processes, I think that Steve is right in his pronouncements. These entities come forth and they are following the letter of the law. Otherwise, they're not going to go forth and get permitted, right? Most 99.9% of the time. There may be some 0.1% of the time where something goes horribly wrong and they slip through the cracks or whatever. But the issue is the processes are set up to tell people things, to give information. And I think when people decide, like, how am I going to spend my time? Am I going to go to the grocery, or go to the doctor, or am I going to go to this public hearing where I'm only being talked at and listen? You know, if I talk and I have something to say, it often doesn't make a difference. So I think people would probably be more motivated to come out to public hearings if they could understand how what they say at a public hearing actually translates into meaningful change of the direction that the entity that came before them wanted to go in the first place. I think many people show up to public hearings and they think, well, you know, okay, I'll go because so-and-so told me or something like that. But they often probably show up thinking it's a done deal. If any of these companies show up before us, they probably have, you know, it's been done, it's cut. They're just going through the motions and telling me what, you know, what they have to tell me. So I think the difference is giving some more power in that process to the communities that show up. Now, once you do that, you have to balance it by making sure that people show up, because you don't want 5 people showing up and then, you know, they're making the decision for an entire community of 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, whatever it is. So I would say that.
I don't mean to interrupt, but we are
No,
running
please.
into the break. These are some really good questions that have been posed, and we do want to continue the discussion. There are 2 other Q&A sessions, so maybe we can start to think about, as he mentioned, how we can galvanize our communities and get people informed on the front end to participate and move the process forward in a way that's beneficial to the communities of color. But we do have a 10-minute break coming up.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to Cecil's comment and just say that sessions like this, forums like this, I mean, I behoove everyone who's involved in a civic organization or who is a member of a church to put on some energy town halls, put on some energy roundtables, put on some energy information sessions, because I really think that what's important is the educational piece and being proactive on the front end so that people understand, get a better understanding of what energy policies are out there, what energy options are out there, so that when companies do come into communities and they say, oh, well, we want to build this new power generation plant in your community, people understand what that means coming into the process, and maybe they won't get so sidetracked by the jobs because they understand. They can go in and say, well, you know, maybe not this, but we want this instead, because we understand the implications and we know the jobs that can come with this particular plant instead. So that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you, and we'll have a 10-minute break. We'll come